This was a couple years ago after that night on the ramp, so 2008 or 2009. It was around 0330 or 3:30 in the morning. Now, why were we up at such a godforsaken hour? We had vehicle gunnery range that day, and the Marine Corps likes to start early. We were at the ramp, and no, the kid was not out playing that night, or morning, or whatever. But anyway, we were prepping the vehicles to move to the range. The vehicles in question were AAVP 7A1 Rams RSs. Big old trucked amphibious people haulers. Been around since around the 70s, but continuously upgraded. They could take Marines to the beach from the ship, drive up the beach, drop the ass end of the vehicle, disengorge 24 Marines, and fight alongside them, providing heavy machine gun support. Sounds pretty fucking cool, right? Aluminum skin and a flat bottom makes them fairly vulnerable to, well, shit, just about everything. I'll try to include a picture of one. I was sitting in the back of the vehicle I rode on, trying to will myself to wake up some more, just a little more. The back of the vehicle was down, and I was just watching the Marines in my section prep their vehicles. My driver walked over to the back of the vehicle and stood before me. "Hey, Corporal," he said in that soft-spoken voice most boos have about them when speaking to somebody who outranks them. "What's up, fuckface?" I asked, putting my lack of ability to be a morning person on full display. "You done pre-opting this bitch?" "Yes, Corporal," he said, pulling out a can of Cope Long Cut. He offered me a pinch out of the can, out of sheer politeness or being a suck-ass. I couldn't tell. I shook my head no, and the boot pulled a pinch for himself and packed it in his lips. "You hear anything about Bag of Dick's wife?" I had not, in fact, heard the current scuttlebutt on Bag of Dick's wife. I should clear up that Bag of Dicks was in fact a Marine in our platoon. Also, that Bag of Dicks was also a misleading, affectionate appellation, we'll say. Bag was a good guy, but he was hands down the worst Marine to ever squeak out of boot camp. He wasn't malicious in his shitbaggery, and he wasn't a go-to-the-brig kind of shitbag either. He was just a guy who couldn't get his head around the Marine Corps. Messed up ranks when trying to talk to higher-ups, dicked up uniform, shitty time management skills, and, that kind of stuff. Real give you the shirt off his back kind of dude, though. Somebody gets fucked up in PT, he was the first one trying to render buddy aid. I mean, poorly, but still trying. One of the boots gets bad news from the home, he's the first to sit and listen to them vent. Just the kind of dude he was. Don't get me wrong. We smoked the living fuck out of him when he fucked up, but there was no real malice in it. Nothing personal, as they say. Just a desire to help this kid get right. His wife was a stripper at Cherry Gentleman's Club out the back gate. Off a Marine, but typical boot though. I looked over at the Marine standing next to another AAV, or track in our section, and I could see him looking at his phone in the morning darkness. I could tell he was anxious just by his body language. I looked back at my driver. "At a fight or something?" I asked, before burning my lips with shitty coffee. "Nah, Corporal," my driver said around a huge plung of chew. She didn't come home last night, not answering his phone either. I leaned back in my seat and looked over my bag. Well, that sucked. I watched him try to call his wife one more time. He held the phone in his ear, but eventually his shoulder slumped, and he pulled the phone away from his ear. I looked over at my driver. "Grab Dungeon Monkey and get the guns mounted," I said. "I'll be back." In case you're wondering, the Dungeon Monkey is the rear crewman who rides down in the troop compartment, or dungeon, if you will. Some folks call their rear crewmen the Dungeon Masters. I, however, think that Dungeon Monkey sounds funnier. I got out of my seat and moseyed on down a few tracks to where Bag was, and he was just staring intently at his phone, like he was willing it to ring. The grip he had on that thing was damn near about to crush it. "Your hog ready to go, Bag?" I asked. Bag looked over at me, eyes filled with anxiety, and nodded. Now, normally, Marine Corps customs and courtesies dictated that he say something along the lines of, "Yes, Corporal," or maybe something like, "Hoorah, Corporal," or some other such overly motivated nonsense bullshit. But like I said, Bag of Dicks had a problem wrapping his head around the Marine Corps. I was still within my rights as a non-commissioned officer to rip his heart and eat his soul, but I wasn't there for that. And on top of that, it's not really my style. I stood looking at him for a second before I said, "You alright, Bag?" He looked down at his phone and then back at me. "My wife never made it back home from work," he said, his voice soaked in worry. "She wasn't there when I woke up, and I'm worried about her. She usually calls me if she's going to go stay at a girlfriend's house or if she goes home with a guy. Well, maybe her phone..." I started to console before the gravity of what he just said hit me. Hold the fuck up. Did you just say, if she goes with a guy? He looked up at me, a terrified look in his face, just like he had just said too much. Maybe he hadn't. Maybe he had. Where the fuck am I to judge? That's how we have things set up, he responded with a whole lot of timid in his voice. I do the same thing. Well, not with guys. Well, I mean, not that I'm opposed. Stop talking. I cut him off. We were getting too deep into the weeds on this one, and I was not equipped to deal with what he was putting down. Not to mention that fucking a stranger while married and falling under the uniform code of military justice meant brig time and a loss of rank and pay. And no shit neither, the UCMJ was written in like 1899 or something and updated like every other century or so, and different methods of providing pleasure to someone can technically get you prison. It's in there. It's still enforceable. I mean, fucking Puritans. He just admitted something to me that I'm supposed to nail his ass to the wall for. I took a minute to realign my thought process, took a sip of my shitty coffee and said, "Shit, dude. Maybe her phone died. Maybe she just got caught up in what she was doing. Let's not freak out," I said in my best impression of a soothing tone. "Look, if you haven't heard from her by noon, I'll try to get you off the range early so you can go check up on her. We just need to get through a movement. Can we do that?" Bag looked down at his phone, then at me. "Yeah, I think I can handle that, Corporal." I put a hand on his shoulder and said, "Shit's probably okay, Bag. Real big brother shit. I mean, that's half of the job of an NCO anyway." On the way back to my hog, I passed Bag's crew chief, who was dragging his gear in. He had missed the accountability formation at 0230. Our section chief was most likely going to chew his ass out for being late, probably smoke him, but it would be done in private, away from the eyes of the junior Marines. "Nice to see you too, bro," I called out to him. He dropped his pack, spun around, and gave me a dual middle finger with a shitty-eating grin. He looked like he was just a little drunk from the night before. I remember feeling annoyed with my fellow NCO, but it was a transgression of which I'm not innocent of. Not this morning, but in the past at least. "Hey, Bag is having an issue. Talk to him about what I told him, okay?" He waved over his shoulder and kept it pushing. I had just let up a smoke when my section leader called out telling us to mount up. We'd be pushing out soon. It briefly occurred to me that Bag had gotten his track ready to roll without adult supervision. I remember thinking that maybe there was hope for this kid. We did a comms check and lined the vehicles up at the back gate of the ramp. "Hey, Corporal." My driver's voice crackled over my CVC helmet. "I think I just saw someone in the tree line." I felt a pinprick of ice run down my spine. "Don't worry about it," I said. "We're about to push out, and I don't think she's going to follow us." I could see my driver's head poking out of his hatch and turn and look at me in the turret. I could tell from the tilt of his head that he had no idea what I was talking about, and I could see him reaching to his helmet to push the talk switch. "I said don't worry about it, fucker," I snapped at him before he could let it out. I turned and concentrated on the tail lights of the vehicles in front of me. I wasn't as creeped out by the little girl as maybe I had once been. I mean, shit. I worked on the ramp, but I wasn't still eager to see her again. I looked down at Dungeon Monkey through the open cargo hatch on the roof and held out my fist thumb extended sideways. He looked back at me, mirrored my gesture, and turned his thumb skywards, which meant nothing was currently on fire in the dungeon. The box he plugged his helmet into was fucked up, so he couldn't talk over the inner vehicle comms. Mute, but not deaf. I reached up and keyed my helmet out. "Let's wake this bitch up and let's shoot some fucking guns, boys," I said, my voice a little more steady than before. See, part of an NCO is saying cool shit in an effort to make the guys feel like badasses. I mean, I do okay. I see my driver shift the track into gear. A track jolts when it shifts into gear from park. Kind of like when you're fake throwing a ball for a dog and he starts running but stops after a step, watching you, because he knows you're a lying sack of shit. When a 903 cubic inch turbo diesel engine starts pushing 26 tons of twisted steel and sex appeal, it's loud. It's like a Valkyrie with a 2 packs a day habit, screaming in your ear. Oh man, I miss it. I honestly do. The Marine Corps recently started phasing out AAVs for some amphibious Italian armored car. It will never be as sexy as an AAV. We were just about to reach the first intersection of Trail Tank and Road when it came over the platoon net. All Vikes, this is Bone Crusher," the section leader on the lead track said over the radio. "Be advised, we have movement on the deck. Someone just moved into the trees off on the left side of the trail tank. Didn't get good eyes on him, but keep an eye out. Don't crunch no crunchies." You see, grunts call everyone who isn't a grunt a POG, a person other than grunt. Trackers call anyone who isn't a tracker a crunchy, because people crunch when you drive over them. Marine Corps humor is a little complex. The tracks started rogering up that they had copied. I didn't bother. I felt a knot starting to form in my stomach, and I grimaced to myself because I knew there was going to be some weird shit that day, and I felt it in my bones. We made the first rail crossing, where the trail tank crossed over the road, which is actually a bit of a process. You have to push out road guards to stop traffic, and then clean up the crossing afterwards. Tracked vehicles sling in a lot of mud, and the Marine Corps likes shit tidy. 2nd Tank Battalion used to shoot across the road without pushing road guards, even though it was ape law in the Marine Corps. They got away with it too, until a captain was speeding down 5 Mile Road at 1 in the morning. And if you've ever wondered what a Ford Fiesta would do to an M1A1 Abrams main battle tank, the answer is not a whole lot. But if you ever wondered what an M1A1 Abrams main battle tank would do to a Ford Fiesta, the answer is a lot. That little red car hit that tank at 80 miles an hour. It crushed itself and pulverized that captain. They were just pulling pieces of him out of that wreckage, and not big ones either. I heard somewhere that the back axle of the car actually came through the front seat. Build Ford tough. Don't got shit on reactive armor. As we were just crossing the road, I saw movement in the trees across the road, and I focused on the area and saw nothing more. I didn't bother calling it up because it could have just been anything, and it wasn't worth tying up the net with. As we pushed up the tank trail, I noticed the general slowed down in the procession of vehicles. We were still too far off from the next road crossing for there to be any reason for it. "Megatron to Bone Crusher," our platoon sergeant called out to the section leader riding on track 1. "Why are we slowing down?" "It's not us, Megatron. We're just cruising," Bone Crusher replied. "Track 9 to Megatron." Begadic's crew chief came across the radio, slight slur in his voice. "It's us. My driver lost his balls, probably why his wife left him. We're gonna pick it back up." I remember getting pissed off at my fellow NCO for that, putting his guy's personal shit into the air like that and giving him shit for it. Bag of Dicks was a shitbag, yeah, but he was still a Marine and a man. That sort of shit would fuck with that kid's confidence, not to mention his already shot nerves. Not a thing you wanted on the day when we were going to put him in control of belt-fed weapons. I leaned back in my turret and lit a smoke, and without looking, I shoved my lighter into the pack and threw it down to the dungeon monkey through the cargo hatch. I knew he was going to ask for one, and I swear I was the only motherfucker who always brought smokes in that platoon. I took a drag. "Hey, Corporal," said my driver, his voice in my ear. "I swear I saw something move in the woods again, like it was moving alongside with us." "Dude, watch the fucking road," I said. "Don't worry about the woods, that's my job." I was trying to give him something else to focus on, like his job or something, but the fact of the matter was that I could use something else to focus on as well. I looked at the truck in front of me. Its crew chief and its version of Dungeon Monkey was both hanging out of their perspective hatches and pointing at something in the woods. "Fucking great," I muttered. We were being shadowed by something. That was very much clear. I didn't think it was the little girl. But to be fair, a lot of the shit I think is pretty fucking dumb. We were getting closer to the range, and the sun was starting to brighten up the sky. Bright pinks and oranges crept over the horizon. I felt a little better, knowing that the sun was coming out. Didn't know why. There's plenty of weird shit in the sunlight too. Unfortunately, when we broke the tree line right before the last road crossing into the range itself, it was fogged out. Like, seriously fucking fogged out. Not like London fog where you can't see your balls, but it wasn't far from it either. My body tightened up reflexively as we drove into it. It felt like we were driving into a wall. And I remember thinking at the time that it was like the fog was waiting to ambush us as we exited the woods. That fog was a real foreboding motherfucker, and I hated that we had to do road crossings in low visibility. It puts the guys in the deck in a lot of danger. But we managed to get through it without anyone getting crushed or run over and pulled onto the range itself. We stopped and put out ground guides on the vehicles, one in front and one in back, to guide the track in tight or dangerous spots. A deep fog bank would count as a dangerous spot. I was on the deck in front of my track. I could barely make out Dungeon Monkey 20 feet away at the back of the truck until he snapped a chem light, a red one. The red light reflecting off the fog and bathing the stocky Marine in full body armor. With the color red and shadows, it made him look otherworldly, like a battle dwarf from hell. He snapped another chem light and tossed it to me. That was a really good idea. We could see each other now, and since our flashlights had been made in the 80s and stopped working in the 90s, Dungeon Monkey was pretty smart for someone from Georgia, as I am very fond of telling him. We moved the vehicles up in their firing points and dropped the back ramps. My driver and the Dungeon Monkey joined us at the back of the vehicle. "How did she do?" I asked, inquiring about the mechanical integrity of the vehicle. "Good to go, Corporal," my driver said, looking around the fog bank that was now our world. "I didn't smell nothing on fire," said the Dungeon Monkey, holding out the pack of smokes I had thrown at him earlier. He too appeared to be lost in the fog. Just looking around, something had him concerned. My driver was a typical blank-faced boot, but Dungeon Monkey wore his emotions like a cheap suit. "All right, get her checked out and get the guns nice and juicy." Neither of them responded, still lost in the fog, and I gave him a moment to respond before I did my best to pierce the fog. "Hey, dickheads," I said, putting some brass in my voice. "Sorry, Corporal," said my driver, shaking his head like he was just trying to shake the fog out. "Shit's feeling weird out here, Corp," proclaimed the Dungeon Monkey. My driver nodded in agreement. I mean, he wasn't wrong. Shit did in fact feel weird out here. I felt it too. And you know that feeling you get when something bad is about to happen? Yeah, I fucking felt it. But I was still a corporal of the Marines, so I had to put my dickhead hat on. "You two are gonna feel fucking weird on balls to forewatch if you don't get that goddamn tractor checked out," I threatened. They didn't really quite scatter, but they did move, and the driver heading out to the ramp into the vehicle, Dungeon Monkey walking around the suspension, looking for obvious damage or leaks. I looked around the range. The fog seemed like it was pushing in on us a little. May have been a trick of the mind, but it sure as shit didn't feel like it. I saw my section leader walking up to the back of Megatron's vehicle. Figured that might be a good place to get some word, so I followed him. Fellas, we ain't doing shit in this stuff, Megatron preached to his section leaders and a couple of random crew chiefs. All we need is one of those boys to light off the Mark 19 in the wrong direction or too close, and we are fucking done, son. Communist NJPs, and everyone's getting one. A couple Marines present chuckled. I looked around the assemblage and I was noticing a lot of apprehensive body language. You see, Marines are by nature square-shouldered beasts filled with bravado and confidence. Out here, I was seeing a lot of hunched up shoulders and crossed off arms and a few concerned faces. Everyone was feeling it. The weird in the air. And I was considering commentating on it, but as an E4 sitting on an E5 through E7 meeting, I was on the council, but I was not granted the rank of master, so I held my peace. Check out the hogs, juice the guns, feed the boys, do not break the ammo. We gotta wait this shit out. So saith Megatron, so saith the law. After Megatron's sermon, the congregation broke up to spread his gospel. I fell in steps beside my section leader. You see anyone in the woods on the way in? He asked me as we walked in. Yeah, I said. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Like saying it out loud had just made things worse. The air felt like it got heavier. I don't know why. My crew chief saw it too. I think they got spooked. We didn't get a good look at them, but my driver said that he saw something shadowing us in the woods. My section chief slowly shook his head, more in an exasperated way. I fucking hate this place, he mumbled. You know we found bodies on this range before. No shit? I asked. Yeah. I was a Lance at the time, he said, launching into his story. And I was sitting in the turret, dumping 40 mic into that old tank at the 1,000-yard line. I see something fly off of it. Ceasefire gets called. I poke my head out, my ROS standing behind my turret, looking down range with those beanos. Had a real befuddled look on his face. Turns out that some recon douchebag had gotten back from his deployment, and his wife had been cheating on him the whole time, with different dudes. So, he kills her, tracks down the Jodies, kills them, buries them all in the 1,000-yard line. Shallow graves behind that tank. What I had seen up there, what I had seen flying up, was a torso. I had dug them up with 40 mic. They showed me a picture of the grave sites. HEDP grenades do a fucking number on bodies. And it fucked with me for a little while. Kept having this dream that they hadn't been dead, just chained up and watching 50 cal tracers ping off the tanks and then hearing that Mark 19 go off before they just ceased to exist. I still have that dream sometimes. Holy shit, was all the response I could muster. Just holy shit, bot. Just holy shit, boss. Sometimes therapy in the Marine Corps is just dumping a wild-ass story on someone just to get it out of you. That douchebag is still in Leavenworth, last I heard, waiting his turn to ride the lightning. There was still some fucked up people in this world. Not every monster lurks in the dark. Speaking of douchebags, I was about to bring up Bag of Dicks' crew chief and his poor leadership skills when my section leader stopped short. I looked over at him, and he started looking into the fog. I followed his gaze, and there was something moving in the fog, a shadow. I squinted, trying to get a better look, and it was a person. Whoever they weren't wearing body armor or a Marine uniform, and I remember a feeling of dread washing over me. My body started to tense up, and I remember the tips of my boots digging into the soil like I was just about to make a break for it. Total fight or flight reaction. There was some dark, heavy shit coming through that fog. As it came closer to us, the fog started to reveal more details about our visitor. I was a little ashamed that I recognized her as a stripper from Cherries before I recognized her as Bag's wife. I had met her on both capacities, but Bag sure as shit recognized her as his wife, as the anguished wail from the direction of the track behind us attested to that fact. It was her, and she was mangled. All of her fingers went the wrong way. Her right elbow was broken outward, and her arms dangled useless at her side. Her throat was torn open. I would say slashed, but shit, that's not even a strong enough word. Her face was battered, cheekbones broken, lips split open, eyes blackened. The sort of punishment you see in old pictures of hangings. It was fucking brutal. Her eyes were dead. No emotion, no spark of life. She looked like a walking corpse. At least to me, she did. And I noticed her feet, her calves, were covered in mud. Odd thing to notice, but I did. Bag shot past us, running towards her. And that snapped me out of it. And I shouted for a corpsman, but as I started walking towards her, I would have run, but that primal lizard brain of mine was still telling me to get the fuck out of there. And this shit wasn't right. My section leader listened to his instincts and stayed back. I really don't judge him for it. And there was no way this woman should be alive. I got no closer than 15 feet before I could take another step. Whether if it was out of my own cowardice or something else stopping me, I couldn't say. Bag got to her though. Nothing held him back, and as soon as he reached her, she collapsed. He went down with her. He put his arms around his wife and pulled her in close. He started to sob, rocking her back and forth in his arms, and I noticed that despite her brutalized body being covered in wet blood, none soaked into Bag's uniform. Strange detail to notice, I know, but I did. The mental image of sobbing Marine, cradling his battered wife, it has stuck with me through the years. It was quite possibly the most distressing thing I have ever seen. I remember he was speaking to her, but I didn't really understand what he was saying. I noticed that her lips were moving too, but her words were not for me. A silent conversation. I felt more of our platoon's corpsman coming up beside me. He made it about 2 steps further than I did, and he seemed to be fighting it. His teeth were grinding into themselves, and a vein was popping out of his neck. You see, corpsmen don't quit when a life is on the line, weird shit or not. If we were out there for 1,000 more years, Doc would have fought to get to that woman the entire time. But he would never make it on time. For more reasons than one, the woman gave Bags a smile, and that was the only time her eyes lit back up. That smile amongst the backdrop was oddly soothing, like a spot of light in a sea of pitch black bullshit. I felt the dread in the ear peel back a little. She reached up with her good arm, her smile melting into a warm grin, and ran a twisted finger down Bag's face, wiping away some of his tears. The palm of her mangled hand came to rest on his cheek. It was oddly tender, given the circumstances. Bags had loved his wife, and she had loved him right back. She drew back a bit and looked him in the eyes. The lights died from her, and the tenderness was gone. No, it got hard. They got real fucking hard. I've seen guys walk out of the room full of dead bodies, with more sunshine in their disposition, and I felt the tension in the air ratchet up a couple more notches. The air felt like it got thicker, and I just knew this shit was about to get dumber. Bags locked eyes with her. He leaned in, resting his forehead against hers. He closed his eyes and nodded. We still had no fucking clue what was going on. So, when she lifted her good arm and pointed, we all turned to look. I say all of us because most of the platoon was watching at this point. I had been so transfixed I hadn't even seen the rest of the platoon come out to see what was up. 52 Marines spread around the range were still standing in various states of unease. Some were standing there wide-eyed, a couple were crying with bags, a few were just standing there looking confused. I saw Bone Crusher standing there with a cup of coffee and an expression that was the physical embodiment of the phrase, "What the fuck?" But when she pointed, we all followed her finger. Even the corpsmen were able to break their concentration from her to see what she was pointing at. Like I said, we all followed that finger. Except one of us. No, not him. Bag's crew chief found himself on the business end of that mangled finger. Might as well have been staring down the barrel of a loaded 50 cal. Bag's facial features turned into a mask of anger. And I had never seen that on this kid's face. I had never even seen this kid get annoyed. He looked back at his wife. She met his eyes and nodded. He nodded back. He leaned in and kissed her on the forehead. He pushed himself up to his feet. The air got right down frigid as he rose. He turned and glared at his crew chief, not saying a fucking word, just glaring. Now, maybe that idiot was still all drunk. Maybe the gravity of the situation just didn't register in his mind. I don't know. But he said about the dumbest thing he could have thought of at that moment. Dude, she was just a fucking stripper, you fucking moot. She wasn't a real person. Yeah, he said that dumbass shit. Bag's eyes got wide. He reached for the knife he kept in the chest of his body armor. It was a K-bar fighting knife. They'd been a staple of the Marine Corps armory since World War I or so. They were made for killing. Weird thing to notice. I know, but I did. Bag started towards his crew chief. His intentions were very clear at this point. The corpsman tried to reach out to him as he passed. Bags nearly stiff-armed him, and Doc fell out of the way. Even if I hadn't been there in the last 5 minutes, just by looking at Bags, I could tell what he was about to do. I had to try and stop him. Not for the crew chief's sake, fuck him. I just remember not wanting Bags to go to jail. I was trying to move towards him. Whatever it was that kept me from getting to his wife just kept me from getting to Bags. I reached for him, got close, but not close enough. "Damn it, Bags," I roared at him. "Stop, motherfucker, you will go to the brig." He ignored me. He didn't care. He had shit to do. A few others yelled at him to back down. We were all on Bag's side on that day. None of us wanted him to get fried for murder, but none of us could move to stop him. All we could do was watch him commit murder. Sure, it was murder that we all agreed with, of course, but one he could never get away with. When he was arm's length from his crew chief, he squared up with him. "Dude," the crew chief sobbed, "you need to fucking chill out." Bag reached out and grabbed him by the throat protector of his body armor. He pulled him close and stabbed him in the belly, underneath his flak. I watched him twist the blade and yank as hard as he could sideways. His crew chief's face went white as a sheet, and the shock was evident. I had taught Bags that move during MC maps. It was surreal watching him demonstrate it on his crew chief. Of course, to be fair, the whole situation was a whole fucking horror show. I figured the only thing keeping the crew chief's gut in was his body armor. That's when the screaming started. Bags threw his crew chief to the deck and started working on his face with a knife. We all sat there, frozen, watching Bag cut this guy's face off. One of the boots who had just gotten to the platoon the month earlier vomited down the front of his chest. I noticed that he had chili Mag MRE for breakfast. Bizarre thing to notice, I know, but I did. The screaming turned into a gurgle, and eventually the gurgling stopped. Bags held up a fistful of meat that used to be a face and tossed it into the grass as far away as he could. To this day, I don't understand why he did that. What the fuck? I heard Megatron gasp out. I found myself to be in agreement with the statement. I briefly wondered how anyone was going to explain this to the higher-ups. Megatron was going to have a lot of explaining. Bag turned around, slowly looking at all of us. I had never seen those eyes in his face. They were hard. His eyes were usually friendly, kind of dopey, but they were hard now. I mean, I will admit he just disemboweled somebody and cut their face off, so it was pretty fucking understandable. He looked back to where he just left his wife. He looked back to where he had left his wife. She wasn't there anymore. He grunted and nodded to himself. Apparently he was pretty pleased with that. He looked around at us again, all of us, staring back, shocked. He flicked his knife, slinging off bits of flesh and blood into the grass. He nodded back at us and then jammed the knife into his own throat. No, god damn it! Now that I think about it, it was probably the corpsman. He had, as far as he knew, 3 bodies on deck, and he couldn't get to a single one of them. That must have been his own personal hell. Bag's eyes rolled back into his head, and he fell. I don't know if he died of blood loss or if he suffocated to death. Most likely it was blood loss, but as soon as his corpse started kicking, I could move again. I looked over at my section leader, and he shook his head and said, "I fucking hate this place."